Welcome, welcome. It's September 14th, and at least in my world, I think it's September 15th for people in Australia and that part of the world, but it's good to have you all here for the video meeting with Cecilio Rogojo. It's just lovely to have you all here. My name is Leslie Nips. I'm your host for today. I'm in Oakland, California, and I was co-director of the 2015 North American Systemic Constellations Conference in San Diego a couple of years ago. And this year I am hosting these conversations with various folk who are going to be working with us at the conference in various ways. I'm also offering a workshop myself on nature constellations, having followed up with Irma and Harvey and Jose, and all of the hurricanes, and the fact that Virginia Beach is known as one of the centers for climate change in the United States. That's going to be an interesting topic. And I'm really delighted to be hosting these events for you all and introducing you to some of these really wonderful people. Let me just say a couple of words about Zoom for those of you who are new to it before I invite Cecilio to introduce himself. For those of you who are on a laptop, if you're on an iPad or a phone, the configuration is a little different. You'll have to find these for yourself. But if you're on a laptop or a computer, you'll find in the bottom left a couple of toggles for muting or to kind of mute your video. Some people have, like Amanda has her video muted right now. I have you all on mute right now. Just because on Zoom, if we all have everybody's little tiny background noise, it becomes like a hurricane a little bit. So we got you all on mute, except for myself and Cecilio. And we'll unmute you when it's time for some questions. The other thing just to make note of, on the bottom for most of you is the chat function. The chat function is something that you can use to privately say hello to a friend. Or if Cecilio says something you think is especially brilliant, you can write, I agree with that. Or it's a way to also post questions in time. Now, Karen Carnabucci has just demonstrated the use of the chat. Thank you very much, Karen. So sometimes Cecilio and I will be kind of in a role, and a question comes up for you that you want to get on the record. So put it into the chat right then. And it may be a few minutes before I get to those questions, but I will get to them, okay? So it's a great way to sort of be in the process with Cecilio. The last one I just want to invite you to take a look at, again on computers, upper right, there's a little toggle. It goes from speaker view to gallery view. It's in the upper right-hand corner. Most of you will want to be on gallery view because it gives you the opportunity to see everybody. On the other hand, if you have speaker view on, then the person who's speaking, who right now is me, is the biggest person on Zoom. And when Cecilio speaks, he'll be the biggest person, okay? But most of you will want to be looking at the gallery view so you can see everybody, okay? So that's my little introduction to Zoom. It's important for you all to know we are recording this and we will be sharing it. So please be advised in terms of your questions and shares that this is being recorded and will be shared. Okay, so let's launch in. Cecilio, it's so good to see you again. I last saw you in Zagreb last year. What fun it was at the ISCA gathering. Could you please introduce yourself to the group a little bit for people who don't know you?
Okay, thank you very much, Leslie, for producing all this video. And I would say that my background is all from business. All my life I'm an engineering, a mechanical engineering, and but all my life was about business, and I have a lot of companies that I create. I sold, I bought, so in very different areas. Until some, I would say 15 years ago or something like that, I was a little fed up of all the business, and I decided to sell all my companies. So it was a good move to do it because it was before the crisis, so I could do good money. In order to try to do another thing, I like to do something completely different. And I was looking for different things than, so I could have many people working with me and all the financial and all that. And I was experiencing a lot of things until I arrived to family constellations. And so the first experience I have with family constellations, I didn't like a lot. It was very strange for me, a lot of people crying. I never cried before as a businessman. And but anyhow, I get involved. Some months later, I was starting a family constellation training. And some months later, I knew that there was organizational constellations. I couldn't understand how it was possible to do the work I saw in family constellations in companies, but I was curious, and so I went to Holland. That was the first training in organizational constellation organized by Jan Jacob. And since the first day, I was completely in love. So since then, I tried to train myself in family and in organizational constellations. But my life now is very centered on organizational constellation, mainly doing training in a lot of countries all over the world, working with companies, and still loving a lot this work.
Awesome. That's really great. I just love hearing your story. That's terrific. And I'm curious, I know a few people on this call, Betsy in particular, and maybe some others who really work in the area of organizational constellations. But I know that many people on the call don't. And so could you just say a few words about the difference? I mean, family constellations and organizational constellations, they're both constellations work. But are there some ways in which they're different that are important?
Yes, I would say that perhaps if we start with constellations, they are all different. It changed the facilitator. So the big change is that for me is the facilitator, and is the philosophy how we look to the client and what to do. Mainly on organizational constellations, I like to give a small sentence so people in companies can understand what we do. That I say that the client has access to information that he knows, but he doesn't know he knows. And that is a sentence quite difficult it was difficult for me to find, but now it's quite easy for normal people in companies to understand. And the idea is how can we give them more information so they can decide better. The point with family constellations and organizational is that mainly we try not to go to the personal issues, even we know that everything is mixed. So that sometimes it has to be an art. If we are working with big companies, it's quite easy to do just, I would say, a pure organizational constellation. But if we are working with small companies that are most of the companies, there is always mixed your personal issues with the company's issues. So the way is how can we work even with personal issues, but with a lot of confidentiality, and just the work can be done inside of the client and not outside. This is if we work in group or if we work in a company. If we work individual with the manager, that is different. We can go a little further. But the main thing is for me is how can we protect the client, because the work we do, even if we do it in a company, we don't have to forget that we are going to the company for one day or one morning, but the client stays there. So we have to be very careful of what we are doing and what we are exposing. And one thing that is, I think it's important in organizational constellations is that we don't need to do a big work with a start and then end in a way that people in companies are very used to decide. So what they want is to have more information so they can decide better. So sometimes, I would say even a lot of times, when I go in a constellation and I think I'm at half of the constellation, the client says, we can stop here, it's enough for me. So they are really very quick to understand, and what they want is to have information. Sometimes it's the facilitator that wants to give more than we have to do. And it's really also important to understand that the client of organizational, perhaps it's not so prepared to understand the deepness of a constellation. So perhaps we have to do small things that at that time, it can be very deep for the client. So we have to see with which client we are working with.
Mm-hmm. That leads me to my next question. And before I do that, I want to remind people about the chat function. Feel free, as Cecilio and I are talking a little bit, if a question arises, just type it into the chat function. I know some of you are on a phone that's not as accessible to you. We'll probably open it up more to more questions a little bit later on, but do make use of the chat function. Cecilio, that makes me think, when we were in Zagreb, I found your presentations incredibly useful. And the focus there, and I think part of what you're going to bring to the conference, if I've read your workshop title correctly, is a particular kind of focus on the client, which you're kind of referring to right here. And it can be a little bit different than sometimes what we learn about or hear about in more conventional family constellation contexts. So could you say a little bit more about what your focus on the client is and what you're trying to do in your relationship with the client?
The point that is in constellations, we talk a lot about that the client is the most important in this whole process. That's what everybody says, but it's not what everybody does. And sometimes people are more concerning on the technique of the constellation and to find a good solution, perhaps sometimes for the facilitator. In my opinion, I don't like solutions. So when I work with the client, I don't work on solutions. I work more on information. So I always say that I like to work on to find a way to a possible solution than to give a solution to the client. Because if we have a problem, we have a lot of different solutions. That's only the client that can do it. So the point is, how can we give all the responsibility of the client for his process? The constellations is something that it takes for, I would say, half an hour to 1.5 hours. So it's very little time. But the client stays with all the information. And it's the client that has to implement whatever he saw in the constellation, whatever he feels in the constellations. So the main point is, how can we help the client to implement what he saw, knowing that as a facilitator, we don't see anything. We don't see what the client is seeing. And that, for me, is really very important, because sometimes we think that we know what is the dynamic behind the client, and we don't know. Nobody can be inside of the client. But we can help the client to do what he must do, but what he wants to do. So the point is, how can we do some process in order the client is less dependent on the facilitator and is only dependent on him. So the work is mostly on responsibility. So to responsibilize the client for his process. Sometimes the clients ask us what we think, and we cannot give that answer. Even we have a lot of opinions, of course, but we have to help the client to do it. In a way, what I'm going to try to do in the workshop is to go a little deeper on this, and mainly try to transmit some of my philosophy on the interview, how to interview a client in order to give him more responsibility, and that all the work will be done by him, not by us.
Thank you. And Rachel just offered a question in the chat, and I see your question as well, Amanda. I'll get to it in a moment. But Rachel has my question, which is, can you give us an example, the way she says it, of some small things that help the client in organizational constellations, or a story perhaps of how constellation work has helped one of your clients in an organization? And I know that always puts people on the spot. You have to think of something.
Yeah, it's I'm switching with an email I received today of a client I work with. It was a really interesting case, and it was a constellation that I did in Brazil that changed my mind about the successors. I don't know if I say correctly in English. So when the father, a son, is going to be the next manager of the company.
Right, a family company, yeah.
Yeah, and that is always a big problem. That normally the father says, "Oh, I want to give you the company. I want to rest," but in a way they don't rest. They stay in the company. They say, give a good, put the son as the president, but he cannot act as the president. And normally, what I used to say with a lot of people that I work with that, and I thought that before, it was that to change that, we need to work with the father in order to know if he really wants to leave the company or not. And in that constellation, I discovered that it's not necessary. We can work with the son in order that the son can show the father that he can do it. Mm. And the point really is that normally as parents, we see our children always as children. So I will not leave my company to a child. If my son still is showing himself as a child, I will not do it. So in that constellation, it was really very interesting because we work with the son in order that he could put in his place of man, of adult, and show that he was an adult. And when we did a process with him, and when we did that, the representative of the father changed immediately and get away of the company. And really was really very, very interesting. And I have, after that, other constellations like this. And it was really interesting, the results. And today I received an email from a girl that I worked with her like that. She's going to be the president of the company. And we did the constellation 1 year before, and she was relating me all the changes she she did. And it was really interesting how she could do it, but the work was essentially working on her, on putting her in a different position, so the father could see a lady, not a girl.
Yeah, yeah, a woman. Yes, yeah, yeah. It reminds us that this cliche we say all the time, which isn't always applied, but it's showing through in your story, that this is a phenomenological method, right?
Sorry.
In English, phenomenological.
Yes.
Yeah. That we're supposed to be looking at the field for the information, and that's a really good example of you feeling like you had a principle and then it showed you something different.
Yeah, but that I can discuss also in the workshop about the field, because I don't believe a lot on the field.
Okay, good.
As it is, I like to be a little provocative, or I like to see the field in a different way, because I don't see that the field is there in front of us. I think that the client creates the field.
Yeah.
And as we are working with the client is open some places where we can go in his own field. And that is an experiment that I will do in the workshop that you saw, I think you saw it in Zagreb, about to do a constellation for everybody so people can understand that. And when you understand that, you see the real power of the client, not the power of the constellation. That's why I normally say that I don't believe on constellations. I only believe on the client. For me, the client is who can do the work, because sometimes we do very excellent constellations that the client is very happy. I'm very happy. The participants are very happy. And 1 year after, everything's at the same place.
Yeah.
And sometimes we do a bad constellation with no energy, and 6 months after, we saw big changes on the client. Who did that? It's always the client. It's never the constellation. The constellation is a really good tool, so people can feel and can see different things, but the decisions and the actions must be done by the clients. It's not the constellation that will work alone.
Amanda asks this question, and again, feel free to put in questions into the chat function if you're having them as we talk. This is kind of goes back to something you were saying much earlier in the conversation. Can you say a bit more about discerning between the personal and the organizational? And I'll just add on, because sometimes they do overlap, right? So
no, it's not. It's not sometimes. It's always.
Oh, okay, good.
for me, it's always. The point is that when you are in a constellation, you have hundreds of dynamics. So you can go more for, and that is the work of the constellator. You can go more for the organizational than for the personal, but it's always mixed. But the point, I think it's here an interesting point that sometimes we think, when we, for instance, interview a general manager, and we see that there are some things in his family systems that could be, that we would work in order he could be a better manager. And that is true, of course, but the manager didn't ask us that. And that's important what the client asked us. So if they ask to go only to organizational, we have to go only to organizational. But what is interesting is that we are systemic people. So, and all the systems between inside of us are mixed. We cannot split organizational, personal, individual, family. It's all inside of us. So as we are systemic, I had some interesting examples about working only on the organizational feeling, on the organization field, how to put a manager in another position with all the employees, getting a better position in the company so he could manage better the company. And sometime after, I talked with him, and he said, I don't know what happens, but in my family, the things are going much better than before. Mm. So it's not, for me, it's not, we don't need to go first family and after organizational, because we are systemic. And it's really very interesting. It doesn't matter where we touch the client, because if we touch the client in an arm, the heart will know or the head will know. And sometimes we think that before it comes the past and after the future, but sometimes working in the future, it solves some things on the past. And that's really quite interesting.
Yeah, it reminds me one time years ago with a client, she wanted to improve her relationship with her mother. So we focused on that. And 2 weeks later, she said, you know, things haven't changed much with Mom, but things with Dad are a lot better. And she considered that a good outcome. So sometimes, like you say, the client knows but doesn't know they know. And sometimes the outcome is different than the outcome we think we want.
Yeah, that's why we have to respect a lot the client.
Yeah.
And we have to try not to guess what is best for the client, because we don't know. Perhaps he doesn't know also, but our role as constellator, and the word is facilitated, we are facilitating a process to the client. Just that. We are not giving solutions. We are not giving anything to the client. Just facilitating a process so he can see what is possible to see at that moment and at that place.
Are there more questions from the group? You can either type something in. Ooh, Connie just wrote a long one. Good for you. Thank you, Cecilio. When you say that it's always the client and never the constellation, can't the constellation shift something for the client so they can do something differently that they wouldn't have access to without doing the constellation? And then she says, hopefully this makes sense. Do you need help from Connie? I can unmute her and she can. You can ask her directly.
Yes, perhaps it's better.
Connie, restate that. I've unmuted you.
So when you say that it's always the client and never the constellation, if a client can't, sometimes the constellation shift something for the client so that they actually can do something differently that they wouldn't have had maybe the access to that energy or that thinking had they not done the constellation. Does that make sense?
Yes, of course. Yes, of course. But in a way, you are saying the same thing I do. About the process of the constellation, it changed something on the client. Of course, any constellation changed something on the client. But the action must be done by the client. It's for me, it's really important. It's not the constellation that is. Sometimes when we see a constellation, it looks like it is magic, and I don't like very much the word magic, because magic is to say something that we don't understand. And I prefer instead of telling that the constellation is magic, I prefer to say that the client is magic. And I'm really sometimes very surprised what happens with the client and what the client does. But the real magician of all this process is not the facilitator. Even they say a lot of good things about us, but the real magician is the client. And the client, it's the only one that can change his life. If we could change the life of people, we would be very powerful people. And we are simple human people, nothing else than that.
Okay.
Thank you, Connie. Other questions from the group? You can just raise your hand like this. I will unmute the phone just because on the phone you can't raise your hand. We've got one from Kim. Thank you, Cecilio. When you're doing organizational constellations, do you work with the client's ancestral field? And if so, how? And again, I will unmute Kim in case Cecilio needs to follow up. Needs to follow up with Kim at all. Do you have the question, Cecilio? I'm worried you're freezing a little.
Not to go to the ancestral.
Hold on one second, Cecilio. We're getting a little freeze of you. Oops. This happens from time to time. You are frozen right now, Cecilio.
Yes.
Raise your hand if you think Leslie's frozen.
Now it's better? Mm-hmm.
No, raise your hand if you think Cecilio's frozen. Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay. Try and talk, Cecilio.
I'm frozen only for you.
Oh, now you're here. You're back.
Okay.
Excellent.
I try not to go to the ancestral field because how can I say that? I think that if we can talk of the ancestral field is inside of the client. So I like to work with the client. And so how can we get from the client all the strength he has? And when we talk about ancestral field or a lot of things from the past, sometimes we give an excuse to the client that he couldn't do because of his past, of his ancestors. But the point is that all those ancestors, what did the good person he is. So with all that the person is at this moment, even with all the things that was wrong, that he didn't like, even with all the traumas that the client has, is what make him strong. And if he can understand that, he can use all his strength as he did before to better. So I like more to work in the present than in the past, because I think that in a constellation we only work on the present. When we go to the past or when we go to the future, for me is we are working with the perception of the client of the past and the perception of the client of the future. So we never change. It's not possible to change the past. The client understands that he's unique. He is a marvelous person, even with all the things that happen with him. And with all that he is, he can be better than him. And that's my with.
So Cecilio, my apologies, but we're struggling a little bit on this end again.
Of going further to the future.
We're struggling a little bit. I don't know if there's anything on your end, like if there's someone else on the internet or you have programs running in the background of your computer. But this is usually what happens when one's internet is not very stable. So if there's anything on your end that you can improve your internet connection.
Perhaps
or even getting a little closer to your modem, yes, to your router can sometimes be helpful.
yes.
You're already improving.
Yes?
Yeah, it's already getting better.
Yes.
But I do think we got most of your answer to that last question about staying in the present rather than working too much in the context of the past, which is, I think, the main thing you were trying to say. Kim, do you have a follow-up on that? I still have you unmuted.
No, thank you. Thank you.
Excellent. And my impression is that some of this does flow from your contract with these people is almost always organizationally connected. And so your contract with these people is about some outcome for the organization in some way, or their relationship to the organization. It's probably not very common that you're dealing purely with, you know, I'm depressed or I want to deal with my son better, the more personal issues. So your job is to help the organizational context, which is very present oriented. Yes. So you have to stay in contact with your contract.
Yes, yes. I think it's really important. Even if I see that there is something more familiar for family constellations, I would recommend to do perhaps family constellations, but not with me. I prefer that it would be another person. So I'm more free to do the organizational work.
Yeah.
Even when I work, for instance, in family systems, in family companies, that we have both systems working, I try to talk with them to see what they want to see. If I see that there is a lot of family issues, I recommend a family constellator so they can do the family issues. Even I can be present, but just as a participant. And after I could take care of the organizational system. Even there is mixed, and now I can I realize that it's possible to mix even on organizational constellations. Some years ago, when I started, I was very much afraid of setting up the father and the mother of a client, because I thought that I was going directly to family constellations. And at this moment, I'm not afraid to do it. I can do it, and but I stayed more in the organizational field, so the client sees the relation with the father and mother, for instance, but in this area. If we go to more personal, sometimes I do hidden constellations, so the client can do a process looking to both system, but not exposing the client to the participants.
Right. I mean, I remember you saying that at the very beginning of our conversation. You have to be very sensitive to the vulnerability of the client in their organizational context and not do anything that would make it hard for them to return.
Yeah, it's always better for me not doing than doing something. If I have any doubts, I don't do it. And one thing that is really important, and in the trainings I insist a lot of this, is that sometimes we are in an organizational constellation and we see that is something personal, or family. And the facilitator asks the client, oh, we see that there is something familiar here. If you want, we can go through here in order to get the authorization of the client. In my opinion, this is a question that we don't have to say, because at that time, the client is not in the normal state. He is quite vulnerable. And if we ask this question, the client will say always yes. And sometimes because he wants to solve the problem. I remember with one client that he saw that there was something family, and he wanted that I went there, and I said, no, I will not go because we are working in organizational. And he was very fed up with me. He left the workshop very angry with me. And 3 weeks after, he sent me an email giving thanks to me because he understood that he would expose himself with some issues that he don't want to be. So we have to be very careful to that. So it's always better, if we have doubts, please don't do it.
Yes. I'm curious because you and I talked very briefly. There's probably not time to do the whole exercise, but everyone here is, working in some capacity. Even if they're taking time off from work to be a parent, they're still working as a parent. But many people on this call are self-employed, they're practitioners, they work for other companies. Work is one of the major contexts of our lives, right? That, intimate relationships, and sleep, right? And so I'd be curious, to sort of turn it towards the people in this group, what you might say or offer from a constellation point of view, organizational constellation point of view, about us and our relationship to work, our past with work and our future with work. I'd be interested in hearing anything you have to offer us about that, for us to think about or chew on for ourselves.
Okay, if perhaps we can do a small exercise, and I'll try to do it in I don't say 5 minutes, 10 minutes.
10 minutes would be great. Yeah.
So if you can relax yourself, if you want to close your eyes and think on your professional life. And thinking of your professional life, think on 3 persons or 3 events or person and events that were important to arrive where you arrive today. But choose only 3. It could be person, it could be events, it could be any that it was important in your professional life. And if we go chronological, please stand up in front of the first one and look at that person or event and remember what happened at that time. And remember if it was easy, if it was difficult, but mainly thinking of what you learn with that person or that event, and all the things that you learn and that you have in your with you that you can bring to your future, and you can use, and perhaps you will use a lot in your future professional life. And when you remember everything and you put all of you, or all of that inside of you, you can say thank you to that person or that event. You can embrace that person or that event. Just keep this for you. And you should do a small back, and you go to the other person and the other event. And look to this second person or second event. And remember what happened with him, with that person, or with that event. How it was, what you learned. Perhaps there are things that you learned there that you don't remember anymore. Perhaps it was difficult, but perhaps all that difficulty was good for what, to be more strong now in this life, in this present. Remember everything that happens there. And take all of that in your heart. And also say thank you to that person of that event, of all that you learn and all that you take for your present life. Now please go to the third person or the third event and look and remember what happened with him, with that person, with that event, what you learned, how important it was for what you are now. Everything you learn with that person or that event. And keep all that with you. Put everything on your heart. Even the hard things that were good for what you are now. And say thank you for all that you learn and what you learn with this person or event. And now you can give your back to this three persons or event and feel this three persons or event on your back. And feel all the strength that they gave to you in this, in all your life. And what you learn with all of them, and how strong you are now because of them. And now you look to the future and try to do one step further, leaving those three people, those three persons or events on the back of you. And you go one step to the future. And you can look to your future. You can open your eyes and see your future with all the background that is with you. Okay, it was quick, but we didn't have much time.
That's wonderful, though.
I hope it was useful.
Does anyone have a share or a question following that? You've got Cecilio right here. You know, something that came up for you in that little guided experience. Yeah, Kalita, go ahead.
I actually ended up, I didn't mean to, but I went consistently backwards in time instead of forwards. And it ended up that all three of the events and the relationships, really, the relationship events, were all in the moment incredibly traumatic. There wasn't one that felt good at all. And I wouldn't be who I am or do the work that I do without any of them. It was
good.
Thank you, Kalita.
Yeah.
Yes, Kimberly, you're unmuted.
Oh, hi. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. So I just allowed the three events to come to me rather than trying really hard to think of it. And as I went through each one, the thing that tied them all together is that they all had the quality of I didn't choose these. There was no effort. It was as if each of these was showing me that every evolutionary step in my life has occurred of its own, and that my thinking that I can direct or control is not proven by my experience, that these major shifts have all had their own momentum and their own way of being, and I've simply endured, and they have taken me where they want me to be. And that what I call my life right now is actually not mine. Like, it's just a kind of like, I can gracefully surrender because I'm in the midst of a shift. And so may I please know that this is yet another another thing that is of itself going to bring me where it's meant to be. So may I please gracefully surrender. So that was super helpful. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Totally. And then I see Amanda's hand going up. Amanda.
Oops. Thank you. Very well. I enjoyed that, and I noticed that one of the incidents is fairly recent, and I felt like I was like, oh, there's a lot unfinished. It kind of like brought up anxiety of like, oh, I think I need to do more. It was a very traumatic incident, and I was thinking like, oh, I need to do more. It brought up like, kind of like opened up some, difficulty for me. So yeah, I'm curious. Any thoughts about that, Cecilio?
The point is that all the what happens with us, even dramatic, is we cannot change anything, but you can change the way you can see it, and what was, and what you can use of that event in your present life. What you learn with that for doing perhaps different things at this moment. And the point is exactly that is accept what happened, because that we cannot change. What we can change is how we see it, how we perceive. And if you detain yourself, perhaps you can find good things there that makes you more strong and like you are at this moment.
Thank you, Amanda. Big question here right at the end. So thank you for sharing that. It's an important question. Before we wrap up, I do want to just say hello to a few people. In addition to Cecilio, I want to start out with just Betsy, who is one of our co-directors. Hi, Betsy.
Hi, how are you?
How are things going on the conference?
Fantastic. We're getting so excited. We have a team of people who have really been with us for a year in a very dedicated way. We know all of you are with us. We can feel all the energy coming toward the conference, and we're just very excited. I think it's going to be really a beautiful and strong and clear event. We're so happy you're able to come, Cecilio, and that was important to us that you were able to come.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Betsy. Betsy's been working really hard. So send grateful energy to Betsy.
See you all. Look forward to seeing you all there. Yay.
Co-directors work very hard. I know.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Thank you.
And then we do have a couple of presenters here. Kimberly Cartwright is one of our presenters. In a sentence, I know it changes every time, but what's the sentence this time, Kimberly?
The sentence is, just because I'm so inspired by Cecilio, the sentence is, even oppression. How is oppression showing up as making you who you are? And what meaning can we make from it that will take us where we want to be? So thanks, Cecilio, for the inspiration, and people are always showing up for me that help me to just keep opening.
Thank you, Kimberly. And I'm going to introduce Karen in 1 second, but am I missing anybody else here who's a presenter?
I'm here, and I joined a little bit late. I apologize.
That's all right. Can you share a sentence about your presentation that's coming up?
Sure. First, I want to say thank you to Cecilio. Mucho gusto. I don't know. I think you're Spanish speaker. Am I correct about that?
I'm Spanish and Portuguese.
Qué bueno. Mucho gusto conocerte. I'm co-presenting with John Cheney, and we are doing a 90-minute workshop on Friday night on ethnocentric belonging. So we're going to look at what it means to belong to a particular worldview, for lack of a better term, to present it, and maybe take it home a little bit to the U.S. climate right now, and explore the polarity and polarization that's going on. We're not going to look at more than the polarity itself, and we're going to feel into using Milton Bennett's model of intercultural sensitivity as a framework to feel into. And we are very excited, and I'm going to be 10 hours jet lagged because I'm coming straight from Morocco, 2 weeks from Morocco, so go gently on me, please.
Okay. Good to have you, Celia. Thank you very much. I'm glad you were able to make it.
Yes, I'm very excited. Thanks.
Yeah. And then Karen, say a word about what you're presenting, and then say a word about the conference and how to register, and I'll pop up a screen when you dive into that.
Yes, I am Karen Carnabucci. I'll be presenting on Sunday on introducing family and systemic constellations to your corner of the universe. And what I can tell you today is that I'm a missionary of sorts, in terms of I really am always looking for ways to introduce this method, which is, of course, experiential, and look at how we can answer that question about how do you explain an experience, and how do you explain an experience that can be really valuable to you in a way that attracts people to the experience. So I have many exercises, vignettes, coming from my work. I'm also a psychodramatist, on how to show, tell, explain, demonstrate pieces of constellation and why they can be valuable to you, particularly related to newcomers. So it can be also growing your business, growing your practice.
Wonderful. Thank you, Karen. And then say a word about how to register, and I'm going to share the screen.
Yes. Well, for those of you who have not registered or have friends and colleagues who are interested, registration is still going on. People can register for the full conference. We have a pre-conference that is exceptional. We have 1- and 2-day registrations available for people who cannot come the whole time, but really want to be there. I will say that Cecilio is presenting on Saturday, October 7th, and that would be ideal for somebody who was only able to come for one day. But lots of choices. Best way to register is to go to nascconstellations.org, and there's registration information right there. You can register online. You can also reserve your room online. I just received some information that there will be a limited amount of cots available for people who would like to share 3 to a room. So if you know of somebody that has some financial concerns, that's another opportunity to save money and be there.
Great.
And my email is right there, realtruekaren@gmail.com. If anybody wants to communicate with me about anything, I'm glad to answer it.
Thank you. I didn't say so, but Karen is also the marketing chair on the steering team, so she's been hard at work as well. So the whole team has been working hard for well over a year to bring this conference to all of us. And just a tiny correction, it's NAS Constellations. Don't stick in an extra C. It stands for North American Systemic Constellations.org. And you will find everything you need there. I hope all of those of you who have not registered decide to come. It'd be really nice to have you. So to wrap it up, Cecilio, mucho gusto. Thank you very much. Really appreciate your help and having you here. In addition to the brilliance of your approach and your client focus, which I really appreciate, you just have a warm place for me. You bring a lot of warmth to this work and a real sense of integrity and authenticity. And I really appreciate that about you. And I can't wait to have a beer with you in Virginia and with many of the rest of you as well. Any last thoughts, Cecilio, before you sign off?
No, just to say thank you, and even that I could prove what I was saying, because this small meditation that we did, a lot of people have very different feelings. That's what I was saying, that we never know what's inside of the client, so that's good for that. And I'm very happy to go to the conference, and I hope to do a good workshop and to have time to chat with everybody and exchange a lot of ideas and see other facilitators. See you then.
Great, thank you. And I noticed 1 or 2 people just signed on. There can always be confusions about time zones. If you contact, I'll be sending out this recording to everybody who RSVP'd. If you didn't RSVP to me directly, find me somehow, lnips@gmail.com, and I'll make sure you get the recording. And many blessings. Have a wonderful day, everybody. Thank you for coming, and hope to see you in a couple of weeks in Virginia.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you, Leslie and Cecilia.
Bye. Thank you. Bye.
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 Okay. And for anyone who's looking for, it's the bottom right-hand corner, little leave meeting toggle there. Well, Cecilio, I just want to thank you personally. Thank you very much for coming. And I know it's getting late there, but thank you for coming. Have a good night. And
Thank you.
Betsy, thank you for coming again. You've come to a lot of these, so I really appreciate that.
Thank you.
Okay.
Bye,
Yeah.
Cecilio.
Bye-bye.